This is Iowa Live. We are sitting here during amidst Iowa's bye week. Mark Rogers, the voice of college football, and myself, Corey Brada, from the Hawkeye of the Storm. And Mark, this is the first of hopefully many Tuesday late afternoon, early evening editions of Iowa Live, and lots to unravel because obviously this past Saturday didn't go quite as Iowa fans or anything like Iowa fans expected, wanted, and the good news is, Mark, and we can talk about this, but the pressure sort of has subsided a bit because you don't have that number 2 next to your name. You're now out of you're, I guess, technically, I think top 10 still, right? I think one of the polls there 11, one of the polls there 10 or something like that. Let's start with you, Mark. I can kind of play host here for the first couple of minutes. Let's just be completely honest. Were you at all surprised by Iowa losing Saturday, and certainly in the fashion they lost?
So I was not surprised. I quickly took Purdue in the 11 points. Now, taking the points versus predicting an outright upset are completely different when we're talking about a 2-score selection by Vegas. But I certainly thought coming off the Penn State game and just the way Iowa plays football, and that Purdue, I thought, was capable and had the history that we discussed. So I thought all the ingredients were there. And so I wasn't surprised. I certainly would not have projected a 24-7 score. But certainly had the game been played in West Lafayette, I would have been more prone to, I almost pulled the trigger on the upset, even on the road for Purdue. But I did not. But I didn't even think twice about taking the points. And I'm curious to hear both during tonight's show and based on what you gathered post-game and through your various channels since the game was played, how the Hawkeye fans are taking that, because it seems like most Iowa fans are pretty measured in their optimism and as they go into each football season, because I think my interaction with Iowa fans is they have, and I rarely generalize fan bases. I think that there are components to every fan base that are reasonable, delusional, etc., to every fan base. But the Iowa fan base seems to be more logical and reasonable than most. They know and are proud of their football program, but reasonable in regards to expectations, and know that 8 wins is typically where they stand, and they can jump out and seriously contend for a Big Ten championship on a fairly regular basis, but not every year. And so I felt as though that there was a groundswell of like severe, high optimism, but at the same time it was guarded. And now it seems as though from the interaction I've had that it's almost back to business. Let's win the West. And as you mentioned, maybe the pressure's off.
Well, I hope that's true. I think from what I learned post game and from what I've learned of some of the response, and we have gotten a lot of response, not only on the Iowa channel, but from the Hawkeye of the Storm on YouTube. You have the Penn State fans who come back and say, "We told you so," and this is what you get, and I smell a rat and all this garbage. But that's in the past. I think the big thing right now, like you said, is focusing on the West Division, because the playoff right now is it mathematically possible? Absolutely. I mean, you win out, Mark, and you beat Ohio State in the title game, I think you're probably in. I mean, I would be shocked if you're not in. I mean, yeah, you got blown out at home, but again, to go 12-1, including a Big Ten title and maybe the toughest conference in the country, I just have a hard time seeing the playoff committee leaving you out. But, I don't know that that's reasonable right now. I mean, it was reasonable after Penn State, but now with one loss, you kind of have to do a reality check. Certainly losing to a Purdue team that, do I think they're top 25? Absolutely. But you have no business getting blown out at home to Purdue. That's just, there's no question about it. The issue is a couple things. And this is what I've had a few days to mull this over. I've obviously had a lot of conversations. I spoke with Don Patterson probably for about 2 hours after our show on Saturday. Him and I end up getting to talking about off the topic sort of things, and it kind of comes around to, circles back around to Iowa football. But here's what and I'm not speaking for Don here. This is what I've come to the conclusion of just myself watching what happened Saturday and kind of what we've seen over the past 4 years with this squad. First of all, after the Penn State game, I was first to say it was the biggest home win since 1985. And I think that's probably still true. Of course, I'm referring to the Penn State game. But, one game that we kind of were ignoring while we were hyping this game and then talking about how great it was that Iowa won was 2017 blowing out Ohio State at home. Like, that was a pretty big win. I know Ohio State fans would probably dismiss it. Iowa fans may dismiss it because we didn't win the West. There was nothing really on the line at that point. But let's not forget that the week after they went to Wisconsin. Had they won that game, I don't remember exactly what the standings looked like at that point, but had they beaten Wisconsin on the road, Iowa had a pretty clear route to the West title. So theoretically, you could argue that Ohio State game was as big as the Penn State game this year. And the reason I bring that up is because let's remember what happened during that Wisconsin game. They got basically blitzkrieged again. So here we have a huge game in 2017 at home where you win. It's the greatest day in years to be a Hawkeye, at least at home. And then you come back the very next week and lay a complete egg. And Iowa scored 14 points on the road at Wisconsin that week. Now, again, that was on the road against a very good Wisconsin team. So I know people may be shy to equate the Purdue loss of 2021 and the Wisconsin loss of 2017. But I can't help make that comparison, especially with regards to the offense. Wisconsin has this vaunted 3-4 defense that Iowa struggles with. But let's be honest, a lot of teams don't run the 4-3, which Iowa runs, at least the traditional 4-3, which Iowa runs now, at least throughout a game as their base defense. But that game just, again, it to me, there's too many similarities following up such a terrific victory with a terrible performance. The only 14 points that Iowa scored in that game were off 2 pick sixes from Josh Jackson. Of course, he had a tremendous 2 weeks. He picked off Ohio State 3 times, and then he comes back and runs a couple back for 6 against Wisconsin. But it didn't matter because Iowa couldn't do a thing offensively. And I think this comes around to my major takeaway. And I'm trying not to overreact from what we saw Saturday, and I encourage Iowa fans not to overreact to what we saw Saturday. But one of my big takeaways is I don't think, and I've been kind of dismissive of this notion for many years, but I don't think we're going to see much change offensively under Kirk Farance until he retires. I mean, it's just not going to happen. The stubbornness of, and I don't want to attack coaching, the coaching staff here, but the stubbornness that we continue to see from Kirk, from Brian, and it starts with Kirk, because Brian is obviously calling the majority of the shots, but it doesn't matter. Kirk is not stepping in and changing anything. I mean, obviously it comes back to Kirk. He is obviously not willing to make adjustments from a play calling standpoint, because we hear every week Iowa fans complaining about play calling. Now, Saturday had much more to do with just getting beaten in the X's and O's and the Jimmies and Joes than it was necessarily just straight up game day play calling. But there's certain things that just aren't going to change as long as Kirk is here and as long as his son is the offensive coordinator. We continue to see the quarterback position be a question mark. I know everybody's complaining about the offensive line, and rightfully so. I heard somebody call for George Barnett to be fired on Twitter. The guy just got hired before the season started. He's coached in 7 games, and they're 6-1, and we're going to fire the offensive line coach? It's such a ridiculous notion, but let's remember, like it or not, I said it before the season, and I don't want to say I told you so, because I didn't. I predicted that Iowa would win the West. I would still predict that at this point. I think the pathway for Iowa is easier than Purdue and probably narrowly easier than Minnesota, although they don't have a real tough schedule down the stretch either. But I said preseason, my concerns were quarterback and maybe offensive line. And I was a bit dismissive of the offensive line because I liked what Iowa returned in Cody Ince and Kyler Schott and certainly Tyler Linderbaum. And so I kind of figured they'll figure it out at the tackle positions. And they haven't figured it out, the tackle positions. So that's just unfortunately the reality that we're seeing. Spencer Petrus has improved, I would say markedly, but his downfalls from last year are pretty much still his downfalls from this year, with the exception being his ability to get the ball down the field. His accuracy has certainly improved as well. but his escapability is zero. I know fans have been ranting about that this week. That's not changing, and especially when you don't have a line that can protect you. That weakness is going to highlight another weakness. So there's just a lot of different takeaways from the game on Saturday. I think we have to accept that this offensive line is just not going to get a ton better. Don Patterson said it on Saturday. I heard him on a radio show here in Iowa again Monday morning, and he's absolutely right. The offensive line, you can't get bigger and stronger midseason. It's just not going to happen. That's what happens in the spring and mostly in the summer. So, they can get better with their technique. They can get better with, play recognition and whatnot. But these tackles just have to get in the weight room this next summer. So you just wonder, how much can Iowa continue to win throwing the football with a quarterback who doesn't know how to escape the pocket and make plays on the run, and a pair of tackles that are just young. I'm not blaming them. It was different in 2019 when Iowa couldn't protect the quarter. It was Stanley at the time on the interior with the Paulson twins primarily. Those guys were fifth-year seniors, and I thought it was ridiculous at the time, and that certainly wasn't George Barnett coaching the offensive line. It was ridiculous. They had no other better options than the Paulson twins to anchor that offensive line. Now we've got a sophomore and a freshman. So as disappointing as it is, that's just life, but that would probably be the quarterback position and the offensive line is probably my biggest concern moving forward, Mark.
Get Corey Brad and myself talking Iowa football. We do this each and every Tuesday at 5:30 Eastern, 4:30 Central. So please join us and grab some friends and family and bring them on in as well. All college football fans are welcome. Corey, when you talk about the criticisms of the style of offense, and I think it's pretty obvious, even from somebody like myself who watches Iowa play the bigger games of the season. I watch 6 to 7 games typically each year of Iowa football, and then watch all the other games that I watch across the nation. The style of play, it's not as stark a contrast as it has been in previous eras of offensive football, but it's still decided. I wonder if there's a connection between Kirk Farance and how he sees this program, where he sees this program, and what offense he chooses to run, because he always deflects any type of national title contention, playoff talk, anything, and kind of sizes his program down to a certain place.
That's because he can get by with it, Mark. His buyouts have been, and I love Kirk Farance. I'm not here to rip Kirk Farance, but, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but if you go and look at Kirk Farance's contract, he gets a bonus for winning 7 games. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And I'm not the only one. I'm no Iowa beat writer. I'm no Iowa reporter, but I have good sources that agree with this. I'm talking people inside the program that agree with this. So, and again, I'm not saying that anybody hates Kirk Farance. I think everybody loves Kirk Farance. But the fact of the matter is, Kirk Farance's agent has worked over Gary Barta and this university for years. And kudos to them. But the problem is, it has put a ceiling on things to where Kirk doesn't really have to worry about, how many Big Ten titles he wins, how many trips to the playoff, because there's this standard that has been set at Iowa of winning 8 to sometimes 10 or even 11 games. And once in a while, you maybe win 12 games. I mean, it happened in 2015. They won 11, 2002. I mean, they have years where they're winning double-digit games, but for the most part, they're not contending for Big Ten titles year in and year out. It's just not happening. And I think most Iowa fans understand that. We appreciate the consistency. Kirk Farance has brought a level of consistency, a level of development. Now, how much of the development can be credited to Chris Doyle? That's certainly something that could come into play. Although Raymond Braithwaite, who's taken his place, was sort of in that Doyle mold, so I don't anticipate them taking a huge step back. I think we probably would have seen something at this point if that was going to happen from a physical standpoint. I don't see that yet, although the line is struggling. But yeah, they're just, to me, until Kirk moves on, we have to get used to being disappointed with Iowa refusing to change things up. Even Phil Parker, I said it after the game, I'm disappointed in Phil. I think Phil is one of the better defensive coordinators in the country, and I stand by that. And he's on my top 3 list of guys to replace Kirk when Kirk retires. But Phil got out coached Saturday, and Phil was stubborn on Saturday. And you can't. I mean, Don Patterson gave me a call midway through the week. I guess it's only Tuesday. He called me, I believe, yesterday, Monday, and he basically said, "Look, I watched the tape back, and we were sending one guy on David Bell the entire game. I mean, there were a few instances where they, had a safety over the top, but for the most part, Bell was single covered the entire game. That's unacceptable. When you're not getting pressure up front, which the defensive line has not played great these last 2 games, you've either got to be effective and well-timed with your blitzes, which Iowa tried to blitz at times, and almost every time it got picked up, or you've got to be able to send another guy back on and make them play left-handed. That's how Don described it. Make them. That's what Hayden Fry was all about. Look, you got one guy who's burning us through halftime. Okay, you can beat us, but beat us somehow. We're going to make you beat us some other way. And Iowa just never did that on Saturday. They continued to allow the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. And I said it going into the game that it wasn't a good time for Riley Moss to go down with an injury. But I don't think that would have made any difference because Matt Hankins was lined up. Matt Hankins is Iowa's best corner. And he was lined up against Bell, I believe, every play, but maybe every catch, but maybe one when Terry Roberts was lined up against Bell. So this was Matt Hankins. I saw Matt Hankins was named a midseason All-American today. Certainly Iowa fans aren't going to be celebrating that. He deserves it, though. I mean, he's played great this year. He's been outstanding. In fact, I think I had him number 2 on my most valuable player list through, I believe, 3 games, and I would have said that after 5 games. He was tremendous in that win over Penn State. But the fact of the matter is he got burned like he has before against David Bell, like Riley Moss has before against David Bell. I mean, everybody Iowa has thrown at David Bell has gotten completely destroyed. It's just ridiculous. But again, you got to put it on the coaches. This is not, you can talk about players all you want, but Phil Parker, love him or not, I do love the guy. He was stubborn on Saturday. I don't feel made the adjustments he needed to make. Certainly defensive line didn't help things, but it was just an all-around poor effort. But going back to your original point, Mark, I think that the stubbornness that we see from Kirk is a trickle-down effect. And, I would like to see Kirk maybe hold his coaches a little bit more accountable. I don't know what's going on behind closed doors. Certainly I'd like to see him hold his son more accountable at times. I don't know who made the final call the first half, and certainly it didn't make a difference in the game in general, but they took a knee at midfield. And then I tweeted out the very next day, Baker Mayfield threw a Hail Mary touchdown from like the exact same spot on the field. And I tweeted out, I said, this is why you don't take a knee on the final play of the first. There's no reason not to do that. I mean, what are the chances of the guys, this is what Don said, returning the football 105 yards or 100 yards for a touchdown? It's not going to happen. And that just shows to me, especially when you're down, a level of submission that should be unacceptable. Now, maybe it was Kirk that made that call, and Brian certainly has to answer to Kirk as the head coach. But there needs to be, I think, a level of responsibility taken, and Kirk is good about accepting blame as the coach. I mean, he's certainly not Scott Frost and deflecting the blame to everyone else. But I think there needs to be a level of responsibility, and Ken O'Keefe deserves some of that. I mean, here's a guy who was Iowa's offensive coordinator for years, and he's got one job right now, and that's to develop quarterbacks. Not doing a very good job of it. Didn't do a very good job with Nate Stanley either. And granted, he's only been here since 2017. But like simple things like knowing how to slide, that Spencer Petrus still doesn't know how to slide. That's just ridiculous. I mean, for him not to be able to teach that, and keep in mind before Ken O'Keefe, I don't know how many years back. I'd have to look at the staff rosters from years prior. But typically, Iowa's offensive coordinator coaches quarterbacks. And this year and in the past 4 years, it's been Ken O'Keefe, who's getting, I believe he's like one of the highest paid. He might be the highest paid quarterbacks coach in the country. Think about that for a second, Mark. Iowa's quarterback coach is the highest paid quarterbacks coach in the country. So, there's lots of blame to go around. I'm not trying. I don't want to feel like I'm just generalizing everything and I'm hitting the panic button. But this loss is sort of indicative of what we've seen in the past. These great highs as an Iowa fan, and then these steep drops. So hopefully it changes. I hope that this bye week, I certainly think it comes at a good time, but hopefully these coaches take responsibility inside the locker room and make some changes, because they're going to need it going up against a great Wisconsin defense next week.
Talking Iowa football with all of you. Please leave your comments, your questions, debate topics for Corey and myself. Please join Corey on From the Hawkeye of the Storm right here on YouTube. It's From the Hawkeye of the Storm right here on YouTube for Iowa athletics coverage. And of course, our Iowa football channel. Please push us past 1,000 subs. Head on over there if you're not watching, as we are simulcasting right now on the main channel, on the Iowa channel, and also on the Big Ten channel here at the Voice of College Football. Yeah, I guess maybe I'm stuck in a certain mentality because of the team I root for, but and I know that it's not as viable for other programs to think that way. But if you're not playing for a championship each and every season, I really don't understand the process of even, especially if you're Iowa. If you're Vanderbilt, then that's another issue. But if you're Iowa, you've proven capable and you have the wherewithal. And look at the coaches that Kirk Farance coached with just on the Cleveland Browns staff in particular, and the championship pedigree that surrounded him. And they will talk about him with high regard when talking about Bill Belichick and Nick Saban. When they bring up Kirk Ferentz, they think he's one of the very best.
And I think that's fair. I mean, like I said, I love Kirk Ferentz. I don't love this coaching staff. I don't know that I've ever been outspoken about that, but I've just, I know people were sort of sideways about Ken O'Keefe when he was here the first time around. Then he goes and coaches with the Dolphins for a while and comes back. I'm not going to say anybody needs to be fired because that's ridiculous at this point in the season. And I guess this would be a good segue into, I had this conversation the other day, not that I want it to happen this year, but to me, for me, a clear top 3 as far as coaching candidates when Kirk retires. And that could be this year. Like, we don't know that. I mean, I don't think it probably will be. I would say he probably is here for another couple of years, but and I know some people don't like to talk about this. Some people got upset when we talked about the last time. I'll just leave Kirk alone, let him retire that's fine. I'm fine with that, but I think it's fair to have the conversation. Don't you think, Mark? And we can talk
Absolutely.
about that topic. So
sure. Let me just,
and I'm going to produce some content on our channel as well about this in the coming weeks. But and I may end up making it a postseason topic, but my top 3 coaching candidates, we've discussed this somewhat in the past, Mark, but my top 3 coaching candidates to replace Kirk if he retires sometime in the next 3 to 4 years. And to me, again, this is very clear. Number 1 is Bob Stoops. There's no beating around the bush. You go after Bob Stoops. I think they've got a chance. I think they would have a chance at Bob Stoops. I think that more now than I did about a month or 2 ago. So you go after Bob Stoops, number 1. Number 2, and he's not far behind Bobby, would be Phil Parker. He deserves it. I don't know if he wants it. He might be satisfied being an assistant coach. I think he's had opportunities to go back to his alma mater, Michigan State, and turn it down. I don't know that on fact, but that would be my number 2 option. Number 3 is Brett Bielema. We've discussed him, and I don't know, what he does at Illinois. Certainly, if he doesn't turn that program around and Kirk retires in 3 years, then maybe that's not a great choice. But those would be my 3 choices. And that it all comes down to, is Gary Barta the AD when Kirk retires? Because if he is, there's a good chance Brian Ferentz is the next head coach at Iowa. And some people want that. I've been amazed at some of the responses, like, oh, don't look any further than your offensive coordinator. Just, take his name away and who's the best qualified guy. He's not the best qualified guy. I mean, from a resume standpoint, what has he done? What has he done? He's done absolutely nothing. He's got his last name is the same name as his head coach. He coached in New England because his dad had a connection to Bill Belichick. You talked about it with the Cleveland Browns. Then he comes here, gets a position coach spot in college, which he had never done before. Then, Iowa, of course, hired Greg Davis, who they knew, I think they had reason to believe Greg was close to retiring anyways. So it was a good segue to let Brian get used to coaching at this level. And then, we'll give you the position. So I don't like to use the word nepotism because a lot of people, everything's nepotism. It is. And that's what it is, right? When you hire your son as your offensive coordinator and he doesn't really have much of a resume. So as far as qualifications, Brian's not qualified to be the next head coach from a resume standpoint. Now, maybe he becomes the next head coach and does really well. Maybe that happens. And maybe Kirk right now is holding him back from doing what he wants to do on offense. I don't believe that, but maybe. I mean, we don't know. So I would certainly, it's not like I'd shut down my channel if Brian gets hired as the next head coach. But as far as who's qualified, those would be my top three. And again, I've said in the past, wouldn't Iowa fans love to have Bob Stoops, even if it was just for 5 years? Just give us 5 years, Bob. And I think Iowa they certainly have the facilities. I think everybody basically has the facilities now to compete, but they have the facilities. Don Patterson loves to tell a story about when he was a coach down in Texas and how he would recruit. When he was he was coaching in North Texas, but he was getting offered the job with Hayden at Iowa, and he knew he was going to take it. So he started trying to recruit players up to Iowa, and he used to tell players down in the Dallas area, "Hey, Iowa Hawkeye football in Iowa was like the Cowboys here in Texas. I mean, there's no pro teams up here." And so Don, I know, is a big believer in Iowa is a great place to not only play, but to win. And I think it's a bit of an underrated program because there has been a ceiling on things. So I think if Bob came in, there would be an opportunity for Iowa to win some Big Ten titles in a short span of time. I don't know if that's going to happen. Who knows if Bob's interested? Who knows if Bob will be on the market at that point? But I guess there's just my mind is going a lot of different places, especially when you have I don't think there's anything wrong with talking about this, especially it's a bye week. Like we just got slaughtered. I think it's okay to discuss possibilities moving forward because we don't know how long Kirk will be here.
Certainly, it would change a certain perception of what Iowa football could be, whether that would turn into reality. But anytime you hire a coach who's won a national championship and competed on a regular basis for a national championship and bring him to a program that has routinely competed in the upper tier in the Big Ten, then people's minds are going to drift to, okay, this coach has accomplished at the very highest level elsewhere. Can he bring that type of winning percentage to our situation? So it's reasonable to think.
Yeah, and I think if Bob was hired here, this is just all speculation. I think if Bob was hired here, he would probably keep Raymond Braithwaite on staff. I think he'd be very smart to do that. Certainly Brian wouldn't still be here. I mean, he's not going to stay as the offensive coordinator. I don't, I would be shocked if that were to happen. I think I could see a scenario where, Brian leaves and becomes I don't even know if Brian is qualified from his resume to be a head coach at a MAC school. I don't know that he's qualified for that. But say he does get a job at a Group of 5 school, leaves, and then Bob retires in 6 years, and maybe Brian then is ready to be the next head coach. There's ways for this to work. But, we know there's plenty of examples. Bill Snyder and his son come to mind where it just doesn't work. It doesn't always work to have your son take over as much as you try and try and try. So certainly that's what the end goal is here. I think this team, going back to this season specifically, what's disappointing to me about what we saw Saturday is Iowa got exposed in a couple of areas that we talked about probably aren't correctable at this point, specifically the offensive line and some facets of the quarterback situation. So that's concerning. Defensively, again, I thought we saw stubbornness from Phil, not mixing things up. Hopefully they'll get healthy. I mean, they were down Riley Moss. They were down Luke Lachey, their second tight end. They were down Cody Ince on the line. So him coming back will help. Deontay Craig didn't play on the defensive line, who played pretty well against Penn State. Is actually one of the few defensive linemen who had a sack in that game. So they were down some guys, but that's football. Purdue was down players. They were down there. I believe their top cornerback or two. They were down Xander Horvath, and they had one guy. King Doru was the only scholarship running back playing in the game. So, and yet Iowa didn't attack downfield one time. It's ridiculous. So, there's lots of. I just want to make a comment. I do see a Brandon Wadley in here. I'm assuming that this is not any relation to a different Wadley who is sort of at odds with the program right now. I will assume that he is not. I did see, not to bring this up because it probably has nowhere to go, but there were or no legs to stand on. I did see Akram Wadley's mom get into a fight on Twitter the other day and made some rude remarks to fans. That's a whole nother topic, but it just made me think of that. I see Brandon here in the chat, and I have not seen his name in the past. But no, it's a bye week, so it's an opportunity for Iowa to move forward and improve some things. Again, I go back to Ken O'Keefe. He's the guy right now that I'm the most frustrated with, besides maybe just Brian, because he's got one job, and that's developing quarterbacks. And I go back, there's Brandon. Okay, maybe Brandon is a female. I don't know. But anyway, it doesn't matter. I go back to the quarterback situation and what we've seen with Ken O'Keefe, his inability to teach quarterbacks to slide. Spencer has not learned to step forward in the pocket and make a play. When he goes down, like when the pocket collapses, Mark, he becomes, I don't even know I don't want to insult. I'm not mad at Spencer, and Iowa fans shouldn't be mad at Spencer. Like I hear all week long, why don't we play Padilla? Why don't we play Hogan? I fully believe, Mark, that Spencer Petrus is the best option Iowa has. And that is not an indictment on Spencer Petrus. That's an indictment on this coaching staff. That's just what it is. So, I'm not there at practice every day. But I do believe he's the best they have. I like Spencer. He's got to take it upon himself. I know he worked with that's another thing. He worked with this New Jersey quarterback guru during the offseason. Like, what does that tell you about the coaching at Iowa? I mean, I don't know if I'd be real happy with that if I was Ken O'Keefe, that he's going off in the offseason training with some guy out east. I don't know. Maybe I'm old school and thinking that that's not appropriate or it shouldn't be necessary. Not when you have a full-time quarterbacks coach who's, again, the highest paid QB's coach in the country. So, quarterback and that offensive line is the biggest thing. I'm not worried about the defense. I think they'll be fine. Let's remember that Purdue has exposed Iowa basically every year that Braum has been there. I believe Braum is the best game day coach in maybe the Big Ten, certainly in the West. I don't know who you'd put ahead of him. Maybe in the Big Ten. I mean, somebody commented on our show the other day, Ryan Day is the best offensive schemer in the Big Ten. You're an Ohio State guy, Mark. Is Ryan Day the best offensive schematics guy in the Big Ten? I don't think you can say that, not with the level of talent that they have.
It's difficult to judge because of that. There are very few right now that I'm impressed with from that standpoint. So, man, if you go just team by team, program by program, it's difficult to find someone that, they all have their issues. If you're talking about the head coach, if you're talking about Harbaugh and Franklin, no and no. If you're talking about Frost, no. You're talking about, very tangible issues that you see recurring, whether it comes to play calling or development of the quarterback position and the offense in general. Yeah, I don't know if I'm willing to step out on that one either way.
Yeah, and I see some comments in the chat about Mark Stoops, and I see Brandon Wadley made the same comment. That would be he would be my number 4 based on what he's doing. He's done it a couple of years at Kentucky.
Yeah,
obviously one of the toughest places to win, I would say, in college football, given what conference they are and just locale. But Mark Stoops would be number 4. But yeah, I think Braum is just his ability to attack weaknesses. I'm not saying he's the best coach in the Big Ten. There's people who believe he's on the hot seat. I mean, if they don't end up having a good season, which certainly they're on track for a good season to where he's not going to be losing his job this year. But there were people heading into this year saying that Braum was on the hot seat. But just from an offensive schematics, game day, play calling standpoint, I think the guy is one of the best in the business.
So when you outline the deficiencies of this offense and that they're not going to improve, they can certainly call a game that's going to protect the offensive line, get the ball out of the quarterback's hands, do all those things that make offensive line play, which is paramount to the offense, of course, but make it less integral. Spencer Petrus, when we had many sessions during the offseason discussing his abilities, my projection on him was less about him and more about just the situation and understanding that if he had been tagged as the Iowa starter and they were comfortable with that and there was basically no quarterback competition. And looking at his progression last year, that I was just playing the probabilities that he would continue to progress and become a better player. I got to say, for a guy that's immobile, that doesn't have a great arm, nothing in the category of Nathan Stanley, that he's also not an accurate passer. It's not a great combination.
Well,
I don't find him as an accurate passer.
He's a sporadically accurate passer. There are times where he puts the money. I think he actually, I believe, I disagree with you on one thing there, Mark. I think he's more accurate than Nate Stanley. And I've looked at the numbers. The numbers bear that out strictly from a completion percentage standpoint. If you look back at Nate's career, Spencer's at least a couple percentage marks above that.
Well, I did say Stanley was more accurate. I said he had a better arm.
Yeah, but so okay, I would debate that too. I think Nate Stanley had a big arm. I think Spencer's got a pretty big arm, but I think Spencer is more accurate with his arm. But here's the deal: I'm not debating you on this. Nate Stanley was better than Spencer Petrus at Iowa. I made a video a few weeks ago about how we got to start talking about the fact that Spencer is actually improved, and he is. And I want to address just for a second this comment on the chat here. So this channel last week said that Brian Farance was a genius for waiting for a long pass for the touchdown. I actually criticized Brian Farance after the Penn State game. I thought he called a very poor game against Penn State. I was very outspoken about that, for the record. Second thing is, I did give him credit, as did Coach Don Patterson. We did give him credit for that play call. It was a very good play call. I'm not here sitting here saying that Brian Ferentz doesn't make good play calls. That's not the point of what we're talking about. So just for the record, we did say that last week, but no, he didn't have a great week against Penn State. But Nate had the ability to step forward in the pocket, make plays. He also had the ability, even though he's kind of a statue, just like Spencer is, he had this really nice ability to spin out of the pocket, make throws on the run. Spencer can't do any of those things right now. Spencer somehow gets out of the pocket. It better be on a designed boot or naked. He better figure out a way to be by himself out there, because 9 times out of 10, if he gets out of the pocket, it's going to turn into a throwaway. So that's frustrating. And whether Kirk Ferentz says that the reason he took a knee at halftime was because of risk of injuries or not, if you have confidence in your quarterback to not make, or confidence in your offensive line to not make a huge error, you're going to take a shot there when you're down a touchdown at halftime. So, again, the coaches aren't stupid. As much as I am giving criticism to both Kirk and Brian for this past week, they realize what they've got, and they do not have, probably you would agree with this, Mark, none of us have as much confidence in Spencer Petrus as we had with Nate Stanley, regardless of why that is.
It's one of the most basic pass plays in football. You sprint right to give your quarterback separation from the defensive rush, to give your guys time to get into the end zone. And is it a high percentage play? Obviously not. But the percentage play versus what you and Don talked about the other night in regards to what is the worst thing that could happen, it's not even, there's got to be a 50 times more likelihood of completing the pass for the score than giving up a 100-yard score going the other way. When have we ever seen that happen? And and even though it is a Hail Mary, meaning it's a highly improbable play, you mentioned Baker Mayfield, with the athletes and the skill involved, it becomes more and more completable than it used to be. You see it, I don't want to call it routine, but it happens on a fairly regular basis. So you got to give your guys a shot, again, when the risk is tiny versus the reward, which is high.
I will say, I agree with all of that, Mark. I will say one of my concerns with the wide receivers heading into the year was lack of size. So there's one thing that if you're fighting for a jump ball down there, but do I think that Kirk is dissecting that? I don't really think so. It would have been an opportunity. Maybe you throw a Brody Brecht or someone who's got size in there who hasn't been playing and kind of make Brom second guess. I mean, Brom was playing 3 quarterbacks against Iowa. This is just what he does. I said it during the game. This is what Brom does. He figures out ways to be sneaky and to highlight his skill position players. So yeah, that didn't make a whole lot of sense. We've seen that in past years with Kirk. It's frustrating. I will say, if there's one positive that came out of the game on Saturday, is that special teams is still very good. I know that Caleb Shudak missed the short kick. I'm not here to make excuses for him. It was a difficult kick because of where he was on the field. Yeah, I believe he was on the right hash, and he was, it was a tight angle. I think most kickers would say they'd rather be kicking from 40 than 20 if you're on the right hash. So, he's missed very few. I think he's missed like 2 kicks all season. So let's not push the panic button on him. And Tory Taylor was punting into the wind all day. I was surprised. Don mentioned this as well in our conversations, that Tory didn't punt more traditional on Saturday. He was punting rugby style, which a little bit surprising given the conditions. But the kick return game was good. Charlie Jones had a nice, I believe his was a punt return, and Ivory Kelly Martin had a kick return that both of those plays put him down in the red zone, and they came up with 0 points total. So it's just, and I said it during the game. I mentioned this during the post-game show too. As soon as those guys returned it down to the red zone, I said, they're not going to score. You could just tell. And sure enough, they didn't score. And here's the deal, Mark. And then we can maybe move on from Purdue and focus more attention on the week ahead. But what's amazing about the game on Saturday is Iowa actually caught more breaks, I thought, than Purdue did. Like the pylon touchback where you have, I don't know who it was, but Purdue wide receiver who's reaching for the pylon, lets go of the football inches before the goal line, hits the pylon. It's a touchback. It's a turnover. Like Iowa got that play and didn't deserve it. Then you have Spencer Petrus, I want to say first or second quarter. Iowa is near the goal line, the opponent's goal line, and Spencer throws terrible pass, nearly picked off by a linebacker, would have been returned. I guarantee it would have been returned for 6. Should have been caught him. He was right in his hands. He drops it. So that's another break. And then let's not forget that Purdue missed like a 31-yard field goal. So Iowa had every opportunity, even into early in the fourth quarter, to figure out a way to do something, and they just never did. And I made the comment during the postgame show, maybe it's time to just kind of flush this and not look at so much tape. Now, Don kind of disagreed with me. He thinks you have to at least look at the tape, which he's the expert. I'm not. But maybe don't look at every play. He talked about that. You need to, if Mason Richmond is missing blocks the same way, 5, 6, 7 times during the game, just watch one of them and then move on as quickly as you can while also taking lessons from this loss.
So this most likely would not have mattered because the probabilities at this point of them pulling out a comeback win were minuscule. But let me know if I'm not remembering this situation correctly. 24-10 game, 5 to 7 minutes left. I don't remember exactly where they were in terms of game time. I was driving. They drive it inside the 15. They've got a 4th and 7 or 8. And they can opt at that point to kick the field goal, get within 2 scores, and then suddenly, it's a 2-score game with 5 or 6 minutes left. But they opted to go for it on again, I believe it was 4th and 7, which I'm going to call maybe a 20% chance of conversion.
Well, unless I'm remembering wrong, Mark, I believe it was 4th and 1. I don't remember a 4th and 7. And you did say 24. It was 24-7. Maybe you misspoke, but you said 24-10. It was 24-7. Of course, that ended up being the final score.
The final score.
Right.
Yeah, I meant that it would have been 24-10 had they made
I gotcha. Yeah. But you know what? I've been an advocate, and I'm surprised someone hadn't come on the chat and ripped me for this. I've been an advocate for Iowa sneaking the ball more on short yardage situations. And what they did, it was 3rd and 2, and Spencer comes up there and sneaks the ball, gets a yard, comes back again, and sneaks again. And it looked like maybe he got it, but the problem with that, Don told an interesting story from, I believe, when he was the head coach at Western Illinois, and they were playing Youngstown, where he did that and it cost them the game. He snuck it twice from the 1, and it cost them the game. And after the game, some Youngstown workers, as they were going to the bus, told him, "Hey, coach, you got that touchdown on each play." And he said, I know we did, but I can tell you one thing: I'll never ever do that again." Because you're relying on the official to make the call on the field, because rarely is that going to be overturned with a review. So unless I'm wrong, and apologize if I am, but I believe it was 3rd and 2. They snuck it for 1 yard, which made it 4th and 1.
Okay.
I was an advocate for them going for it at that point. I don't know that I was an advocate for what they did. They snuck the ball without Monty Pottebaum, their fullback, behind Spencer, which seemed a little bit odd because Monty has been the guy who's really helped. I mean, between Spencer at 6'5", Tyler Linderbaum, your All-American center, and your 6'1" bruiser of a fullback, Iowa tends to get 2 to 3 yards on every sneak. For some reason, Monty Pottebaum was not on the field, so that was strange. Yeah, it would have made it a 2-score game. And certainly 4th and 7, Mark. If it was 4th and 7, which, again, it may have been, I would have kicked the field goal there to make it a 2-score game.
Okay. Yeah. Never mind me then. All right. Iowa Talk here every Tuesday night here at the Voice of College Football, 5:30 Eastern, 4:30 where it really matters, there in Iowa Central Time. Here with Corey Brada from the Hawkeye of the Storm. We would encourage everyone to head on over there and please sub to Corey's channel from the Hawkeye of the Storm. And right here at the Voice of College Football, check out our Iowa channel, because Corey's done an outstanding job of supplying us with tremendous content on a regular basis there, including, of course, the post-game show each and every Saturday with Coach Don Patterson. So looking ahead, of course, no game this week. I brought up the offensive deficiencies for obvious reasons, because they were front and center from game 1 on, and the discussion being, are they going to get better? What can be done about them? And I certainly excuse them to a certain extent, and I'm sure you heard me say this a few times, that I was giving Iowa a bit of the benefit of the doubt. I did not in any way expect this to be a prolific offense, but giving them the benefit of the doubt that they were playing to the defensive prowess, the game situation, the score. And I thought that had something to do with it. Now, here we are in a game against Purdue that has a fine defense. If you check out their numbers across the board, they have a fine defense and have played consistently all year. But still, 1 touchdown at home is just a pretty pathetic offensive showing. So now the prospects of this team making it through the Big Ten Western Division, I think you might agree, Corey, it's not necessarily that this team in any way should fear any one of its opponents, but it's just, what are the probabilities of being able to make it through the entire schedule? And not that this team cannot win a division championship and still lose one more game. That may be the result of all this, is that a 7-2 team in conference wins the division. But certainly, to see them go through now what is going to be Minnesota, Wisconsin, Nebraska out of their final 5 games, certainly Northwestern and Illinois can't be an issue if this team wants to achieve its goals.
Well, I never said this, but a lot of people thought Purdue, I don't know why, but a lot of people said Purdue was one of the easier Big Ten games on the schedule because it's at home and it was against a team that, I guess Purdue was the one team. I did say this back in the spring, that Purdue was kind of my dark horse team in the West that nobody was talking about. And I guess that I was right. I wish I wasn't. But Northwestern should not be, there should be no doubt in that game. Northwestern's defense is not, although they beat Rutgers the other day, right? So, you never know with Patty Fitz, but man, that should not be a game where we're sweating as Iowa people. Nebraska, I was starting to get higher on Nebraska, and then they lose to Minnesota, and I just don't know that they know how to win as well as they can play at times. Adrian Martinez making the same, dumb errors that I saw the safety that he threw for, I guess you can say. Ridiculous. But so those games are games Iowa should win. Certainly Minnesota and Wisconsin, those are the biggest ones left. But you got to win all of them if you want any chance at making a playoff. And, going to the Rose Bowl would be great. There's no question about that, especially I'm assuming, and I don't know, Mark, you probably have a better feed on this than I do, but I'm assuming if Iowa were to go 10-2, 10-3 after losing to Ohio State makes the college football playoff, that you're probably selecting Iowa as the Rose Bowl invitee at 10-3. Is that how that works, with the Rose Bowl not involved with the top 4 today or this year?
Well, it's not automatic. So we've seen that work both ways. We've seen Rose Bowl opt for the Big Ten championship game loser, but we've also seen them just default to whomever they believe based on brand name and record and all of that put together. Northwestern did not go to a Rose Bowl either time that they lost a Big Ten championship game. They were bypassed in one of those years. Let's see. So 2018.
Was the Rose Bowl in play, though, or was it part of the playoff?
So in 2018, Ohio State did win the Big Ten championship and go to the Rose Bowl as a non-playoff team. So that makes sense. Okay. Trying to think of, there have been times in which the runner-up in the Big Ten has been bypassed. I'll have to go through the Rolodex and see, pinpoint that year or those years.
But that I guess would be my thing. How excited would Iowa fans? I would hope they'd be super excited, but it is weird going to the Rose Bowl without a Big Ten title. That's just a weird thing for me to imagine, but that also comes with the territory now with the playoff. But that's certainly a possibility that could happen. But I think for Iowa fans, for this loss not to be one of those painful losses we look back at postseason, they need to win out. And I don't know how reasonable it is. I mean, I'll just say this. I had a conversation with Don over lunch a few weeks ago, and I told him, I said, I'm thinking Iowa has a good chance at winning out given their schedule. And he agreed. I mean, this is Coach Don, who's, again, he's a homer, but he's pretty level-headed. He thought we had a really good chance at winning out. Didn't guarantee it. And certainly we see why, because college football is a weird sport. But I still think they have a chance at winning out. I could also see them losing to Wisconsin. I could see them losing to Minnesota. And then who am I missing? Illinois was the other team. Man, I can't imagine a scenario where they lose to Illinois, to Northwestern, and to Nebraska. But if you think about that, Mark, all those games have a kind of an odd, I don't want to say rivalry storyline, but Patty Fitz has had Iowa's number. Brett Bielema, he'd love to beat his alma mater. And Nebraska's a rivalry game on the road against, with Scott Frost, who, is he going to be on the hot seat at that point? That's a possibility. So there are storylines there. You can't take any game for granted, especially in the Big Ten. But man, you beat Wisconsin. I saw somebody in the chat comment earlier in the hour. If you beat Wisconsin in a week and a half, a lot of what happened this past Saturday will sort of be, it won't be totally forgotten, but for Iowa fans, they'll be able to move past it, because it's not every year that Iowa wins in Madison. In fact, they won in 2015. I think before that, it was 2009 when they won at Madison. But, I mean, nobody really wins at Madison a whole lot. So, and Wisconsin has looked better here as of late. Now, we'll see that, every Iowa fan should be captivated by Iowa or by Wisconsin-Purdue this Saturday. That will be an interesting game. I don't know who. I hope this is on the pick ballot for this week, Mark, for our media picks, because that is a fascinating matchup, in my opinion. So yeah, it's obviously has huge implications in the Western Division. Technically, Iowa does not control its own destiny now, because if Purdue wins out, they have the tiebreaker over Iowa. So yeah, I don't know.
Who owns the division, controls the division right now is Minnesota. They beat Purdue.
That's true. Yeah, that is true. So assuming, and they do have Minnesota has a pretty manageable schedule. Can you imagine? Let's after losing Mo Ibrahim, against Ohio State if they were to go and win the division. But it's
And
anybody's division right now. I will let the control. I mean, last week, Mark, we talked about. I think we both said, man, it's hard to see who is number 2 right now behind Iowa. I think both of us probably agreed it was Wisconsin, but now it's a 4-team race. Just in 1 week, it becomes a 4-team race with Minnesota beating Nebraska, Purdue beating Iowa, and Wisconsin, of course, not playing in the Big Ten this past week. So yeah, it will be interesting to see. I think Iowa's if I had to put a percentage on it, and this is just spitballing, Mark, totally spitballing, I would say Iowa has maybe a 25% chance of winning out. And that's probably being generous. And probably Iowa fans don't like that because they think there's a better chance given the schedule. But that's a pretty good percentage to win 5 straight games after what Iowa did against Purdue.
Because I'm surprised that you stated that Coach Patterson believed that, not that it was probable, but they had a good chance, because I heard him state a few times, for the record, that he was just trying to point out to people that were giddy over the early start how difficult it is to go undefeated. That just from a statistical standpoint, it's not easy for anyone. And that's one of the reasons why even the heavyweights in college football have a low chance probability of finishing undefeated. And people are like, how can that be? Ohio State's only got a 15% chance of going undefeated. Well, if you look year to year, they trip up at some point almost every year.
Yeah, we cut up that portion of our live with Don, Mark, and made that into a video. What are Iowa's chances of going unbeaten? I think somebody commented on there several weeks later, you might want to revisit this subject. And you're right, he was sort of dismissive because mathematically it's just very unlikely.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not trying to say he was predicting that Iowa would last week, but again, prior to the Purdue loss, I just flat out asked him, I said, you think they're going to win out? And he said, I think so. And, he was wrong. I mean, a lot of us were wrong. I don't think anybody that I know predicted Purdue to win, and shame on us, because we should have seen. I saw, it's one of those things where you see it. You're absolutely right. I picked Iowa against the spread. That was stupid. I mean, that was just stupid for me to pick Iowa against the spread. That's why I don't have a Patreon page at this point, Mark. I got to get better at it. I'm sure. I know you.
You don't have to predict games to have a Patreon page.
Well, that's true,
Corey.
but
you can provide a lot of other great content there.
No, but the picks are. I don't have a Patreon page, and I don't have a Patreon page with my picks, and that's why. But it was a stupid decision, and I think everybody with a brain and that knows data would see that. Brom he was a 4-0 against the spread against Iowa during his time at Purdue. So even though they lost the game in 2019, they covered. So, and there's the numbers that everybody
folks,
should care
check
about.
Out the banner. Corey has left me open for a promotion, and I will take that each and every time. 12-6 against the spread last week, 85-58 for the season. Do some math on that. Basically, if you bet $100 on any game against the spread, your return on that's going to be $91. So you'll lose $100 for all the losses, but you'll pick up 91 for the wins, put you solidly in the green.
And Mark, I don't know if I should share this, but I will say this. I was not I saw you release like our mid-season rankings with all your media members. I don't know if you're making that available to the public. I was not real high on the list for the betting against the spread, or the picks against the spread on that list.
But
so I was very high on the straight up picks. I was very high on that list. So I don't know what that tells you. I guess I'm good at picking.
You know what that tells me? So because of where we've arrived with gambling being so prevalent here, not here,
which
but
I don't get involved with. So yeah,
in college football and in sports in general, is that people look at the predictors' record against the spread more so than they do of their ability just to predict the games correctly, which I think is a complete fallacy, because there can be all sorts of manipulation of the points. I say this all the time, Corey, and then we'll get back to Iowa football. One of the reasons why my percentage predicting against the spread goes down egregiously once the game reaches like a 21-point spread is because if those games play out as expected, they're blowouts. You don't know who's going to be in the game on either side of the game. You don't know who's going to be playing in the fourth quarter. You don't know how hard or motivated they're going to be.
Yeah.
Hard they're going to play. And you don't know how the game's going to be called at that point. You don't know if the winning coach is going to put down the throttle and just crush the other team, or if he's going to let off and give up, When he's winning by 30, give up 2 touchdowns and win by 16 when he's a 19-point favorite. You don't know. Therefore, I've tracked my numbers at my winning percentage on blowout games. Expected blowouts by Vegas goes down considerably. It's like a toss-up.
Well, I won't say who else was high on the list, but you were right at the top of our list as far as people can rely on to pick against the spread. Those are very good numbers that you have. I mean, I'm saying this from a non-betting person and someone who has no interest in sports gambling, but those are excellent numbers on the screen there, Mark. 12 and 6 against the spread this week, 85 and 58 on the season. And I will say, I guess I should promote myself a little bit here. I think of, I don't know how many media members, I was towards the top few. So as far as straight up picks. So I'd like to think that I know something about picking college football games. You're right. I know nothing about picking against the spread. I'll admit that.
So my point being that to me, it's more valuable and should be and more relevant to be able to just predict the winner of the game.
Based more on football, right? Is that kind of what you're saying?
It is.
Yeah.
All right. Iowa by 50 next week.
Spaghetti Factory. I love that. That's a great username, Spaghetti Factory. And Spaghetti Factory was a part of our post-game show. I recognized that name the other night. So yeah, but I don't know about by 50 again. 2000. I'm trying to think. 2019. Man, I'm usually better at this, Mark. I'm trying to think the last time Iowa went to Madison. I know in 17 that was the year where they didn't score a single offensive point. But 2019, obviously they didn't win. But man, I can't think of that game, and I'll think of it as soon as we get off the air. Do you remember it, Mark? You're kind of a savant with
the 2019 Iowa-Wisconsin game in terms of the score and what happened.
Just if you can even remind me of a play, I can probably recall it to my memory. But off the top of my head, I
really don't, and I try to watch Iowa-Wisconsin games.
Yeah,
it's one of those games that I typically expect to be.
I got it. That was the AJ Epinesa had a strip sack in that game. Iowa forced an early turnover, but Jonathan Taylor, as he did against everybody, racked up a ton of yards. Iowa with a bomb of like 82 yards to Tyrone Tracy to get Iowa back in the game, and I believe Iowa had a chance to tie it up with a 2-point conversion. And the referee got in the way of a Mekhi Sargent block on a QB draw with Nate Stanley. That's what happened in 2019. And Iowa lost the game because they couldn't stop the run from Jonathan Taylor. 2018 was at home. Hawkinson Fant with the deep balls. Gus Johnson was on the call. But yeah, 19 was I believe 19 was also a Fox game. But yeah, it was the Tyrone Tracy 82-yard pass or whatever it was.
24-22 in 19.
Yep. 2-point conversion. And I don't mean to blame the refs. There was an instance during the Purdue game. I don't know if you caught this, Mark, where I don't know if it was O'Connell. It might have been O'Connell it wasn't a QB draw, but it was he just got up and ran because the middle was wide open and the referee got in the way of an Iowa tackler. So that's happened a couple times to Iowa in the past few years. So hopefully it doesn't happen again. Hopefully Iowa got that one out of their system for this game in Madison.
Those sorts of things are supposed to even out at some point.
Yeah.
All right. I want to make sure that I am respectful of your time, Corey.
I can go a few more minutes. I did see a chat about Xavier Wampa earlier from our Notre Dame fan that's on the chat, which that's a good topic because Xavier picked his top 3, I believe, a few days ago. Ohio State. Of course, for anybody that doesn't know, Xavier Wampa is the number 1 safety in college football recruiting for class of 22. He's an in-state kid, Central Iowa kid. His top 3 he announced were Iowa, Ohio State, and Notre Dame. I saw somebody in the chat say Notre Dame's a favorite. I have not heard that. I've heard more Ohio State than maybe Iowa. But I'm not good at this. I saw, what is it, 247 that does their crystal ball projections. And what a shocker. Both of 247, both of the Iowa guys picked Iowa to land him, and both of the Ohio State guys picked Ohio State. So I don't know. It'll be interesting. Man, if they get him, he will really help they're young. They're not young, but Jack Kerner and Kayvon Merriweather are not seniors, and they've got a couple more years of eligibility if they choose to take it. But that would be a huge get. I don't know what it would do to Iowa's recruiting ranking in general, but that would be huge. And then they landed Will Hubert, who's I believe from Nebraska. I'll admit I don't know a whole lot. I need to study Will Hubert up a little bit more. He's a defensive end out of Nebraska, class of 22. He's going to be walking on to Iowa next year. But I believe he had scholarship offers, one from Buffalo, and he had interest from other. I don't know if he had an offer from Nebraska to be on scholarship. I'm guessing he didn't, but Nebraska wanted him. So, Iowa does, you may say, well, are we talking about a walk-on? Iowa has the reputation of developing walk-ons into significant players. I think of Nick Easley as far as a skill position player here a couple of years ago. I mean, you can go down the line of guys who Iowa has done this with. Even basketball, you could say Iowa's kind of good at producing walk-ons and producing them into even NFL talents at times. So, we'll see. Class of 22 is looking a lot better. I know before the season started, Mark, we were like, man, this class is not coming together. We're not getting commitments. And then the Jazzy and Patterson commitment, that was sort of the one that I started feeling a lot better about this class. Certainly, they've still got some work to do. I did a video on their commitment from an Ohio kid running back this past week, posted it on the Iowa channel, had someone respond and say they need a quarterback. I said, well, they got a quarterback. Carson May's coming in from Oklahoma, and his response was, is he mobile? We need a mobile quarterback. No, he's not mobile. Iowa does not recruit mobile quarterbacks. He's more mobile than Spencer. That's not hard to beat, but he's 6'5". He's a pro style kid, not bashing Carson May. Iowa has had success with some pro style kids, certainly at the collegiate level. And I'm still not discounting Spencer Petrus. I still think he's got room to improve. But the class is coming together nicely since the commitments of guys like May and Patterson.
I'm guessing that if you would go through the Big Ten and then by extension the other Power 5 conferences and make some type of objective analysis or subjective as well on mobile quarterbacks, how many teams start mobile quarterbacks versus immobile in this day and age, I bet it's 75 or 80% mobile quarterbacks. Like what I was attempting to do and continue to do, I don't understand. And this comes from a guy that's really old school and loves watching, and did at the time, Drew Bledsoe or Dan Marino stand in the pocket and just deliver dimes all over the place. That's how I like the game to be played. But it just from a schematic standpoint and just the advantage that you have with a mobile quarterback, you have to have such a great pocket passer. I don't believe Spencer Petrus is that guy to outweigh the advantages of being able to burn a defense, whether that's just being a runner per se, or just being a guy that can break, contain, and pick up a first down and threaten the defense.
Mark, if you look at the best quarterbacks in the NFL, and this is starting to shift a bit, but the best quarterbacks in the NFL for a long time have been your typical pocket passers. I think of Tom Brady. Aaron Rodgers certainly has legs, but he's a pocket passer. Andrew Luck was obviously one of the most highly touted draft prospects, at least in my memory. And again, that's starting to change a bit because you have guys like Kyler Murray who is really playing well. Russell Wilson really kind of, I don't want to say he started it because I'm sure you can come up with examples of guys before him that played that way. Michael Vick comes to mind. But that's starting to change a bit. But I would just think, again, not to bash this coaching staff, but in 23 years of Kirk Farance being the head coach here, you would think that Iowa would be, like you said, either starting to recruit more mobile quarterbacks, or B, they would be recruiting a lot of quarterbacks who are playing at the next level. But Mark, the only quarterback who's on an active roster from Iowa is CJ Beathard. And although CJ wasn't I wouldn't call him dual threat, he's one of the only quarterback in the past 10 years who could run at Iowa. And I'm including Ricky Stanzi, James Vandenberg, Nate Stanley, Spencer Petrus, all on that list. And Mark, here's some Iowa trivia for you. This shouldn't be hard. But I know I shouldn't take that for granted because you're not an Iowa guy. But who's the best quarterback in the Kirk Farance era?
The best quarterback, is it? Well, I guess it's the Brad Banks.
Brad Banks. And what's interesting about Brad Banks is he's the only true dual threat Iowa has had. Now
he was the best quarterback in college. Now, of course, other
right.
guys
No,
made it
you're
to the
right.
NFL, and
you're
he
right.
did not.
That's what. But yes.
And I brought up the productive player.
Yeah. I brought up the NFL strictly because my point is they don't have quarterbacks that are elite at this level consistently, and they don't have quarterbacks that they're putting. It'd be one thing if they have game managers here, like Andrew Luck wasn't. I mean, Stanford was, I believe, okay when Andrew was there, but he was a draft prospect.
They were really good.
Were they really good? That was before the Christian McCaffrey era.
He took them to 2 BCS games.
Wow. Well, this is why you're the voice of college football, and I'm just your guest. But
they won an Orange Bowl and a Fiesta Bowl when he was there.
Well, you showed me up on that one. But I guess I'm just thinking if Iowa were producing pro-style quarterbacks that were making it to the NFL, we could argue for them sticking with the system. But the fact of the matter is they're not. And the only guy who you could say was elite at quarterback in the past 20, I mean, you could make an argument for Drew Tate, but I mean, that doesn't roll off the tongue like
mobile, right? Drew Tate.
Yeah. I mean, he's more mobile than anybody Iowa's had since. There's no question about that. Even more mobile than CJ. But Brad Banks, I mean, like it or not, he's the best quarterback Iowa has had under Kirk Ferentz as the head coach, and he was mobile. And people keep saying, we need someone like Brad Banks. Although Brad Banks didn't make it at the next level, he's sort of a generational talent for an Iowa. I mean, that just doesn't come. A guy like that doesn't come around every day. So I would love that as well. That's not happening. Joey Lavis is a kid who's here now as a freshman. You know, I don't know a whole lot about him. I think he's more mobile than Spencer, but I think probably everybody on this roster, Deuce Hogan's more mobile than Spencer. Alex Padilla is more mobile than Spencer. That doesn't mean they're better quarterbacks than Spencer, but they are more mobile. And I think fans are just frustrated that it seems like every year Iowa selects a new quarterback, it's always the guy that's not mobile, because they have had mobile guys on the roster. Alex Padilla is mobile. Peyton Manziel, the guy that was kind of the backup behind Nate Stanley for the majority of his career. Peyton Manziel was mobile. But Peyton Manziel, I believe, went on to, and I could be wrong on this, but I believe he ended up going to Abilene Christian and losing his starting job at Abilene Christian. So the answer is not always the mobile guy. It's frustrating that Iowa can't recruit more mobile quarterbacks to be here in the first place, as far as elite quarterbacks.
I may not even know otherwise who Peyton Manziel was at this point, except that I saw that he was highly recruited by Iowa, and I reached out to him on social media, and we had him on here for an interview after he was signed. Yes.
Wow. I got to
look at this on YouTube. Fields on while he was in high school.
You said what? You had who?
We also had Justin Fields on for an interview.
Okay. Well, I did know you've done some interviews with recruits, but I did not know this about Peyton Manziel. So is this on YouTube can I watch this?
Yeah.
Wow, that's cool. Well,
I don't even know when that was, but
it didn't work out. It didn't work. So do you know where he's at now? Am I right that I could be wrong. Maybe it's not Abilene Christian, but it didn't work out. Let's just say that. And I see Blake Jameson does comment AJ Derby. AJ Derby transferred to Arkansas, right? Isn't he the kid that got arrested for punching the window out of the school bus? Was that in Iowa or was that Arkansas? Does anybody remember that? All right, Blake Jameson's an Iowa fan.
I don't remember that incident.
Yeah, he was, I believe, an Iowa City kid. But he wasn't. He was an athlete. I mean, the kid was a really good athlete. And I believe Iowa moved him to tight end before he transferred out, and then I believe he ended up playing quarterback. I want to say maybe he played tight end. I don't remember. But I believe he played at Arkansas after that. But yeah, I guess you could go back and chart how many guys Iowa has recruited. Maybe they're recruiting mobile quarterbacks and they just end up not panning out. I mean, again, Manziel and so far Padilla being prime examples of that.
I'm leaving the link to the interview in the chat. I just found it.
Okay.
I just came up
Perfect.
pretty quickly. I'll send it to you as well. But
Awesome.
if anyone wants to check out the interview with Peyton Manziel, yeah,
Well,
I used to just like run through the top 300 on 247 and just hit those guys up on social media, but just turned out to be too much of an exercise.
That's awesome.
To keep up with.
Oh yeah, it's a difficult assignment. I have a hard time getting in touch with some Iowa kids that I try to have on my show, and that's just one team. So
yeah, and you're dealing with 17 and 18-year-olds, so
yep.
Most of them don't get back to you, which is understandable.
Or they ghost you.
Or yeah, exactly. So there you go.
It is what it is.
All right, excellent. So the next time the Hawkeyes will be on the field, it will be against Wisconsin. And that should be an interesting affair. Everybody's still in play in the Big Ten Western Division that you would expect would be in play with a reasonable shot, including Wisconsin, despite the 3 losses. Keep in mind, only 2 in the Big Ten, and both of those against Eastern Division opponents. So it should be quite the October and November in the Big Ten Western Division. Same thing in the East. Very interesting between Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan State. All right, Corey. Again, one more time, Corey Brada from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Corey, let everyone know what you're working on.
Well, obviously, like you said, from the Hawkeye of the Storm, YouTube, Spotify, Anchor, wherever you listen to podcasts. I want to throw a banner up here, Mark. We are going to be live with Don Patterson Sunday at 7 p.m. So a special bye-week edition of the Iowa channel. So maybe you're listening through the main channel, but if you haven't already subscribed to Iowa Football, the voice of college football, on YouTube, we will be live with Coach Patterson talking about Wisconsin, Purdue. Certainly, we'll spend a majority of our time talking about Iowa and how they bounce back. So please join us during that show. Don is looking forward to it. He'll be doing some play-by-play work for, I believe, ESPN again this weekend on Saturday for the FCS. But he'll be back with us on Sunday. And then the following Sunday, I know that's the day after the Wisconsin game, but Don and I will have another special edition on Sunday because Iowa post-game on the 30th after the Wisconsin game will just be me. We'll take your calls as normal, but Don will join us the day after as well. So we got plenty of Iowa content we're pumping out here, Mark, and we're so happy that Don is with us to share in that. And yeah, we're looking forward to it every week now. And I guess I've got the banner here too. I made up the other day. We have Iowa Live here every week. If you didn't catch it from Mark, 4:30 p.m. Every Tuesday. So this is the new time to watch. Hope we can continue to grow it, Mark.
Absolutely. Appreciate everyone being here. And if you want to check on the enemy, 8 o'clock Eastern time on the Nebraska channel, we will talk Huskers there as we do each and every Tuesday night, 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 Central. But Corey and I will be back next Tuesday night. Corey, thank you so much.
Appreciate it, Mark. Have a great night.